what we're going to talk about today is basically the lessons from building a healthcare technology company. And we have a literal expert with us today, somebody who has built a healthcare technology company and has learned a ton of lessons along the way. We've been doing this, or Josh, at least, you've been doing this for about 7 years now, or a little bit more.
That's right. Yeah, it's been 7 years and lots of lessons learned, lots of mistakes as well that we've improved upon. But it's been a fun ride.
Yeah. And I think iteration is such a huge component. Like, I mean, you're going to get into this. I'm sure you'll talk about that, but from where the product first started to where it is today, and just, I'm sure your mindset has changed a ton from when you were finishing up school and really with that kind of clinical hat on versus how you are today and the people you surround yourself with today. And probably all of that has changed.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind is, often I get asked by folks going through medical school or residents or even staff physicians about, the path to starting a company and entrepreneurship. And often they'll ask, well, Josh, if I want to start a business at some point in this space, should I do an MBA, for example? And kind of my feedback is always, there's no course that you could just take that will suddenly teach you how to start a business. The only way to actually start a business is to just start one and learn from there. It's kind of the same way where if you're trying to learn, surgery, you can't just sit through, years of classes and never pick up a scalpel and actually do surgery. You learn the most of how to do surgery from actually doing surgery.
Right.
And business is different. So, I think an MBA might teach you a lot of good theoretical frameworks and foundational things and, financial statements
Right.
and theories around marketing and stuff. But the truth is, until you actually work on a business, you're not actually going to know how to build and operate one. And the other part of it too is so much of a business and how it works is unique to that business. It's unique to the industry you're in. It's unique to the type of product that you're building and selling. And most certainly any course or program you take will not at all be tailored to the type of business that you're building. So my feeling is always, well, you can do the MBA, but don't feel like it's going to teach you, the magic toolkit to building a successful business.
Right. And, obviously you've met a ton of mentors along the way that have kind of guided all the thoughts that you have about building a business and where you move next and all that. You mentioned, obviously, there's differences between different industries and different businesses. And I'm sure some of the mentors you have are probably more related to this industry where they're in healthcare and they've maybe built companies within the healthcare space. They have expertise there. And then I'm sure you've met some other folks who are just other industries and there's probably some grains of salt in everything, or little pieces, little nuggets that you can pick up from every different industry and every different mentor. But what are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed in working in this industry in healthcare versus some of the other myths or different beliefs that people have as a technology company outside of healthcare?
Yeah, well, actually, maybe if it's okay with you, maybe go back to the mentors topic and we can dive into that.
Yeah, okay,
first.
Sure.
Just because it brought to mind some thoughts when you were describing that.
Yeah, maybe if you want to shed some light on the importance of mentors.
Yeah, it's funny. So, one of my mentors who I was catching up with recently, the advice that he's always given me is, when you're thinking about feedback on how to, improve your company and your product, listen to customers first, then followed by, mentors with relevant domain expertise, and then followed by maybe other mentors, and then followed by kind of like, he's like your investors and your family, right? And by the way, he's an investor as well. So, right. But his point is that no one can tell you more about the right way to do things than your customers will, and that's something I think Alan, customer-centricity is one of our 3 core operating principles in the company. And I generally believe that that's true, that customers and our households and partners will guide us the best on how to build our product and build our company. But certainly mentors can be helpful. And I agree with that mentor/investor of mine, where the more domain specific that mentor is, or in other words, the more that a certain mentor has done what you're trying to do, the more you should weigh their advice.
Right.
And the more that they haven't done what you're trying to do, the more you should take it with a grain of salt. And what I find is that the best mentors know that they shouldn't be trying to tell you what to do, but they should be trying to share relevant data points from their experience that you can then use as the business person to incorporate into your model, your framework for how to build your own organization. The bad mentors are the ones who try to be authoritative and say, Alan, you have to do it this way because it worked for me. But most great mentors know that every business is in a different situation or is run differently. And the most they can do is just try to provide data points or experiences to help you figure out what's relevant for your company. And so, that's what I found helpful. So I would always say part of it depends on kind of the stage of the company. So I think, when you're starting out your company, you don't really have much going on. Mentors who can just help you do the basics, like get the company off the ground.
Just to get data in the first place.
Yeah, like teach you about the customer development process, how to do customer discovery, how to get your product off the ground. They're more helpful. But definitely as a company progresses, you end up needing more and more domain specific expertise. So at certain points about, okay, well, how do we get, electronic health record integrations, right? Or how do we actually distribute this more broadly among healthcare systems? And those are topics that are harder for mentors who don't have domain expertise.
Yeah. And you mentioned the core values that SeamlessMD has, and the majority of the core values, and I know that there's 3 that we kind of operate by today. But those 3 have always been there from the beginning. They've just kind of shaped in different forms and gotten more and more specific over time. You mentioned customer-centricity, which customer-centricity, which is one of the foremost values that we carry as a team. Always putting the customer first, acting as if the customer is in the room at all times. What are some of the other core values that the company has, and how has that manifested over time?
Yeah, so one is speed, and that's about moving the ball forward, and then knowing that you can always course correct if needed. And it's about not trying to wait for complete or perfect information to get something done. And especially in healthcare, when things can move slowly, anything that we can do as a company to remove friction for our patients and our provider partners to help them move quickly with us is always prioritized. So for example, that might mean, so very commonly, we know that, in some other businesses, especially in software, whenever you're communicating with potential customers or existing customers, there's this idea that whenever possible, you should try to do things verbally or face-to-face, and you shouldn't just rely on emails because you might lose context. There's also feedback that you have to have very, formal emails and like long written essay emails, and that works for some industries. But in healthcare, our providers are busy people. They don't have time to read essays. They often don't have time to get on a phone call for every possible thing during the sales or the implementation process. And so often for them, they would rather get the 2-word answer from us by email than have to wait longer or set up a call. And I think it took the time at the beginning to understand, okay, well, what do our customer partners need in their experience to fit their workflow? And that's different than a lot of other businesses where people are at their desk all the time. If you're trying to get in contact and communicate with a busy nurse or a doctor or someone else, they're on the go. And so they prefer that you send them that 2-word text or email or something else. Right. That just makes their life easier. And trying to fit their workflow is more important than trying to get them to fit ours.
Right. And so sometimes putting that 2-word answer, which is, just what they need to see, is the right step to go. And I think that leads into kind of that second core principle, which is around simplicity. And simplicity being, simple. What's a simple decision for the team, but also makes sense for the customer, and kind of weighing both speed and customer centricity on both sides of that simplistic or simplicity sort of approach. So I think that's a really well-rounded system, and all 3 of them kind of combine to create something wonderful.
Yeah, it's to make it easy for them, right? I mean, it really means for us to make it easy for our partners to buy, to use, to deploy the solution, maintain it. Um, it's even as simple as going back to communication with our partners. These are busy people. If the main point of your message can't fit on the screen of your phone, there's a really good likelihood they're going to say, "This is too long. I'll read it later." And who knows when that's going to happen because how busy they are, right? Or it's things like, in the implementation process, what can we do to remove friction? So if, oftentimes, if we can, we'll take over stuff for them so that there's less on them to do to configure, clinical protocols on the platform because we know that they have limited time during their day. So anything we can do to make it simple for them is always better.
Right. And I think those three values together, anytime that there's a big change. So when COVID happened, it made the decision process so easy because it was just, well, let's talk to our customers, figure out what can we do to better help them. So that decision was super simple to make because we just weighed, okay, well, what would be beneficial for our customers at this point in time? Okay, and now let's go out and build that. And so that decision came pretty naturally, I think. In terms of the differences that you've seen in different industries with healthcare versus other tech companies and other industries that you have maybe investors who are a part of other industries and other mentors, what are some of the biggest differences that you've seen in this industry?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, one is evidence really matters. So yes, like in any other business, people like case studies, and that's still true with us. But in healthcare, it's not just about having a case study; it's about having very rigorous evaluations done, right? So it's only in healthcare that your customers want to see statistical analyses done,
Right.
right? They want to know exact sample sizes. They want to know how an evaluation was designed. They want to just know what the p-values are for statistical significance. Those are elements that you wouldn't find. I mean, go to Slash website, look at their case studies. I don't even know if you see numbers there anymore because that's not what matters for other industries. But healthcare really matters, and it's fair. It's because in healthcare, these solutions that are given to patients are impacting their health outcome, impacting their mortality potentially, their quality of life. And so our customer partners need to be confident that this is a solution that will actually create real benefit and is safe for patients to use. And so the bar is higher in terms of the evidence in healthcare, and it's rightly so. I think another thing that is common is, in an organization like a hospital, and this is where I think it's not that different from any other large organizations. We've realized that it's so important to have champions, right? Especially if you're someone, a company like Seamless, where you're bringing digital patient engagement to market, where that's a very, very relatively new category. Digital consumerism of healthcare is happening much later than digital consumerism of retail, of travel, of even banking, right? Frankly, even airlines have I think went digital earlier than healthcare.
Right.
And so, we're pioneering a new category here. And what that means is that in most organizations, you have to find early adopters and champions who are willing to say, hey, we've never done something like SeamlessMD or digital patient engagement before. We're willing to lead this movement internally and prove the value here. And so usually we're having to identify a champion. And usually a champion is a stakeholder with influence and authority who can help us navigate the decision-making process, bring people to the table, etc. And this person is so important because if there's no champion for this opportunity, the thing's going to die, right? I mean, Alan, imagine in our organization, if you were trying to bring a new marketing solution to the company, and you were facing a bit of resistance from, let's say, me in the decision-making process, because this is probably more important to you than it is to me. If you're not championing it, it's probably not going to go anywhere, right?
Right. Totally. Yeah. And I mean, if I was just to, and actually this is going to lead in pretty well. I had collected a bunch of myths that we hear all the time. And I'm wondering if you can maybe shed some light on the truth to some of these. But what you were saying kind of, made me remember one of them, which was, the myth that we hear is you should let your champions pitch the product because they know the internal folks better. What's the truth that we've seen around that myth?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely important for your champions to socialize a new innovation to their partners, because that way, if they bring you in, there's context that's been provided to the team. But it's definitely a mistake in our experience for a champion to try basically do the entire pitch on your behalf, because the truth is that whenever you formally present an innovation like SeamlessMD, because it's a new innovation, there are all kinds of questions that the team is going to have, right? They're going to have questions about, how does it integrate with our electronic health record, or what's been your success engaging older patients? How do you meet accessibility criteria for technologies? So all kinds of questions that are easy for you and me to answer right now, because we work here, we know all the answers, right? We've addressed all of those gaps in the solution over the years. But if you're a physician champion who's just learned about Seamless for half an hour before, and then you try to pitch this to your team, you're not going to know any of those answers, and it's not your fault. It's not your job to know those answers. But the thing is that they're going to expect you to have those answers, right? And the other thing too is that because it's not your job as a physician champion to sell SeamlessMD, you're not going to know the right value propositions to share depending on who you're talking to. You're not going to know the right messaging that we know works to communicate exactly what we do properly. So it's unfair to expect a physician champion to be able to best pitch SeamlessMD or any other innovation internally and answer all those questions. And so, it's not uncommon that, we've had partners in the past where they've said, no, like, let me try to do the whole pitch myself. And then these barriers come up because they can't address all these questions that they shouldn't have been expected to. And then they come back and they go, oh, actually, you know what? Yeah, we should bring you in so that you can actually, frankly, do your job and explain all these things to the team, which is fine. Sometimes they have to experience that to get it. But I think more and more partners have realized the value of bringing us in. And I think part of it too is, as you know, Alan, our approach is not to sell. Our approach is to educate potential partners on SeamlessMD, and if it truly is a fit, then great, we'll guide you on the buying process and we'll help you buy the solution. But that's very different, I think, than trying to sell something.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties in really well to the next myth that I hear a lot. If your hospital shows, like if you have a study that's out and it shows great results, then typically the decision maker will just pay for it. They'll just find the money and they'll pay for it based on the results only. What's the truth around that myth?
Yeah, so there's this like false concept, or there's this misconception that if you just have amazing research study data, then and therefore a strong business case for it, of course every organization is going to buy your solution. But the reality is every organization, whether it's in healthcare or not, has priorities, and those priorities are chosen based on limited resources, limited staff bandwidth. Those priorities can change, from year to year as well. And so, your great business case proposal is competing with 100 other ones in front of the decision maker or the leadership team. And so, what we try to understand is, okay, well, what's actually a priority for the decision makers funding this initiative right now? And if their priorities include things that we actually create real value on, so things like readmission reduction, length of stay reduction, for example, if those are actual priorities right now for leadership, then it's a great time to pitch them on the business case, because we're actually solving a problem they care about. But if priorities are things such as, implementing an electronic health record for the first time, or improving the scheduling process for our patient, and if those are the priorities right now and we don't directly fix those problems, then it doesn't matter how good our business case is. Like, why would anyone care right now? It's kind of like, Alan, there's so many solutions out there in marketing and sales that quote unquote could help us increase like lead generation or other things. But for example, if as an organization our number one priority right now is hiring more people, then that's what's going to catch my attention if there's a business case there. But if there isn't, then it's like, yeah, I do care about those other things, just not as much right now.
It's lower on the list. Yeah,
it's lower on the list. And that's and it's on us as a company to understand where do the things that we help with stand on that list at any time.
Right. Yep, totally fair. Another myth that we get a lot is, free pilots obviously reduce the friction to make a sale. So if you offer the product away for free, it's easier to get in, and therefore it's going to increase the long-term success of the product and make it stickier. What is the reality on that myth?
Yeah, this is one of those things where if you brought in someone from the healthcare system into the room, they would probably disagree with me on this because I mean, so many organizations, love free pilots. I mean, listen, as a company, Alan, you and I love free stuff. In fact, as individuals, we love free stuff, right? But health systems and hospitals are complex organizations, right? They're not an organization of one. And one of the challenges that we find with free pilots is that in general, if an organization doesn't have some skin in the game, there's just less natural accountability. And what that means is that the individuals involved with the pilot or the trial are not as invested, and they're not as engaged. And basically, that makes the entire initiative less likely to succeed in the first place. And why does that work? Well, here's what happens, right? If I give you SeamlessMD or any other innovation for free in your organization, Alan, what's the downside if it doesn't go anywhere? What's the downside if you don't do anything with it?
Yeah, literally nothing. Maybe a bit of time,
right?
Some time spent.
Maybe a bit of time, right? But let's say you had talked to your VP or your C-suite and they gave you money out of their budget to cover the cost of the initial trial. And what happens if you don't do anything with the solution, or you don't invest time to get value out of it, and they see all these other organizations who are getting great results with it? What's going to happen is they're going to look at you and say, well, gosh, like the next time Alan asks for funding, I got to rethink if I want to give it to him because he wasted it the last time I gave it to him. And because of that dynamic, then the team that's implementing and supporting the innovation takes it really seriously because they've just asked for support from leadership, and they're not going to want to not do it justice, right? They're going to be invested. They're going to want to make sure they do their best to make it go well, and they take it very seriously. But I can imagine, Alan, that Alan, imagine if you asked me to fund some internal solution that you wanted, and then you didn't, like, I'm pretty sure you would take it more seriously than if you just did like a free pilot, right?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It falls on me. At the end of the day, I would know, hey, I was the one that brought this in. I went internally and found funding for this solution. So I want to make sure that it's successful. It's my baby. It's my pilot. So I totally
right. And I'm going to ask, oh, hey, Alan, what's been the ROI on the thing that I gave you money for? Yeah. Right? If I didn't give you any money, like it might not come up ever again,
Almost never. Yeah, I get that. Now you mentioned earlier, at SeamlessMD, we don't really focus on that old kind of school selling effort. We don't do that. It's more educating because this is a new product category. It is something that, requires a lot of education. And I think as well, physicians in this industry, that's kind of their structure. When they are at society meetings, they're educating and they're sharing their data with each other. I do know that there is, obviously an element of sales for every CEO at a company, whether it's for the product itself or some other areas. How do you view kind of the role of a CEO?
Yeah, one of my favorite frameworks comes from a venture capitalist called Fred Wilson. He's a VC at Union Square Ventures. He was an early investor in Twitter, Tumblr, a number of other very successful tech companies. And the framework that he recommends is that the CEO has three jobs. The first is to set the vision and the strategy for the company. The second is to make sure we hire the best talent in the company. And then the third is to make sure there's always enough cash in the bank to run the company, whether that's from investments or revenue from customers or other means. But as I kind of worked on Seamless, one of the things I realized is that all three of those jobs relate to sales in some way. So, for the first one, in terms of setting a vision and strategy, part of my job is not just to set it, but it's to sell that vision and strategy, sell it to yourself and the team to convince you that, hey, this is a team that you should join, that you should stay with, sell that same vision to customers for why they should invest in building this future with us. And then on the second, in terms of hiring, great talent, it's, our job to sell team members on why they should pick Seamless over other opportunities. And then the third is in terms of cash in the bank. It's my job to help sell product to customers. It's my job to sell shares to investors. And it's interesting because when you're coming from the healthcare world like myself, there's often a negative connotation with business and sales in general. And I think it's getting better. But one of the things I've realized is that in order to be an effective leader in anything, whether it's in business, nonprofit, your community, you have to embrace sales to some extent. So, if you're in a hospital and you're trying to launch an enhanced recovery initiative or another patient safety initiative, you have to sell your team members on why they should take on this new thing with you, right? Or if you're in your community and you're trying to, rally people to clean up the neighborhood, you have to sell your neighbors on this vision you have and kind of rally them around it. So I think, if the intentions are good, being able to sell is actually a very, very important skill, and we should embrace that. And I think, in healthcare, we're starting to realize that it's not a bad thing. It's often a necessary thing to move the ball forward.
Right. Yeah. And I imagine it got the bad reputation because of the old school manipulation and, okay, we'll move some words around and get a different result based on what we're saying. And so I totally get, why people would be skeptical of sales, and I don't want to be sold to. I don't like that idea, but educating and go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, and there's a big difference now, right? So with the internet, we've democratized access to information about products and solutions. It's so much easier to research and look up, vendors and products and solutions and get closer to the truth, right? So in the past, when you relied on sales reps that you knew one-on-one, you could only rely on the information they gave you, right? And it was very hard for you to find out, things about their reputation, who else they worked with, other options out there. Now with the internet, control has shifted to the buyers, right? So health systems have way more control than ever before about who they work with. And so, organizations like us have a much higher bar for what we do, because we know that there's so much information available to our buyers that we have to do an even better job to earn the partnership and to keep re-earning the partnership year after year.
Right. I think, obviously everything that we're talking about here fits in really nicely with those core values again, and really focusing, for the customer. Everything is for the customer here. And we have a motto at Seamless, act as if the customer and maybe an investor is in the room at all times. So in all of our meetings, act as if the customer.
Maybe not the investor, but the customer.
Yeah. Totally. And
the hard thing about healthcare, though, Alan, is that the customer for us is the health system, right? And then there's the patient.
Right.
And so one of the challenges that you run into when you're a digital patient engagement company is that, yes, you have to be very customer centric, but then in many cases we're often very patient centric. And then there's often a fine balance, because sometimes things that might be better for a patient might not be better for a healthcare system or provider, and vice versa. So it can get tricky sometimes where we have to walk that fine balance, and we do our best with that. But yeah, I think in general, at the very least, it's customer and patient centric. And I think if you do that, generally you'll do okay.
Right. Yeah, definitely. There's a fine line to walk there, and when it's considering something like patient engagement. So actually engaging with the product, health literacy obviously plays a big part in there. And so maybe it's a word that, the physician, no, I don't use that word, but it's obviously been proven that's a better context for patients. You mentioned before when, you're hiring talent for the company, and you're in a way selling that vision to these potential employees. And I'd say almost everybody at SeamlessMD had other options before working at SeamlessMD. There was other, job offers going around for every single employee that's at SeamlessMD. And so to be able to, really sell that vision to them was a big, obviously important thing to do. In terms of fostering the right culture and bringing in the best talent, because that's obviously crucial to the success of a company. What are your thoughts around hiring best talent and then fostering a culture that promotes growth and everybody performing at their best?
Yeah, and I think for us, there's two traits that we really look for in particular, and we saw that in you, for example, Alan, as well. And one is about being very mission driven, particularly in being aligned with the mission of the company. for us, it's to ensure every patient gets the right care at the right time. And the second is resilience. The idea that the people that we pick are the ones who, if they run into a wall, they're going to just go right. They're going to keep trying to go through it. Right. And even if they keep running into the wall or they get stuck, they're going to keep trying to get through the wall. What we don't want are people who they get to an obstacle and then they just give up, right? Or they get to it 10 times and then they eventually give up. And so being mission driven and being resilient are really important, particularly because, frankly, we are in healthcare and we have so many unique roadblocks and obstacles that don't exist in many other industries. And if you're not passionate enough about the mission, and if in your DNA, you're not a very, resilient person who's had to overcome obstacles in the past and are used to it, you might find it hard here or any other healthcare organization because there are so many barriers in healthcare. And so we have to make sure that we screen for people who are aligned on particularly those two traits because we need people who, when it gets hard, is when they thrive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I think when you identify that and you find those common things among people you hire, that's why people at Seamless tend to bond together. And in fact, if you ask, I think most people about Seamless, what do they value most with the company? The answer is almost always it's the people, and that works, and it's possible because we're so intentional about our process for hiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest sticking points for any business that's preventing them from succeeding is just quitting. So, when, like you're saying, running into that wall, are you going to keep going or are you just going to quit? That's a really powerful statement.
Yeah. And this is where, people who are aligned to the mission or having that alignment is so important because you're right. I mean, the company only is over if the team quits. Technically, if you don't quit, it still keeps going, right, as we said. And it's important that you're aligned to mission because you want to know that this team will keep going when times get tough. And if you're not truly excited about the mission, it's very easy to just give up when it gets tough.
Right.
I think for a lot of companies that don't work out, it's because the team wasn't actually as passionate about the mission as they thought they were.
Mm-hmm. So if you had actually, originally gone with that Seamless Pets idea back in the day, you maybe would have quit because it's just
100% would have quit. Yeah. We joke about it, but it's absolutely true. I mean, I remember, when I was in school, I had some buddies where, we were interested in businesses and we would brainstorm all these different ideas, like I think we brainstormed different ideas for, social travel apps and other kinds of businesses. But looking back, that was not a good way to try and start a business because there's almost no way I would have been, passionate about that idea that I'd be willing to keep working on it when times got tough. And almost certainly that would have happened at multiple points.
Right. And I think too often I hear, I have a great idea. When is it going to turn into a success? And I think you talk about this all the time, but the execution is the important part. I think, it's not too difficult to have a great idea, but it's who can execute it.
And it's why is it the right idea for you right now? And it's more than the idea. It's about like, do you have some sort of breakthrough or unique insight into that idea that you can then commit to do it differently or do it better than other people.
Right.
But yeah, no, I agree with you on that. It is all about execution, and then that depends on having the best team as well.
Right. I remember early on, this is maybe 2-3 years ago now, you were giving a talk about, and it could have been paraphrasing another talk given by Google or something at one point in time, but
I definitely steal their stuff all the time.
Yeah, it's what's the saying? It's great art is stolen or something like that. Plagiarism. It's not plagiarism. It's copied. I don't know the line. Doesn't matter.
It's something about it's about copying is the best form of flattery, or
yeah, something like maybe. That. No, I think that is along the lines. But what the talk was you want to hire people with complementary skills. You want to hire them for specific reasons, not just because they're your friends. You don't want to just have people that you can, go out and have a drink with all the time, and you all have the exact same ideas and the same thinking models or the same frameworks. And I think that was really important, especially for me to hear that, because understanding, okay, maybe we have a bias inherently where we want to hire people who think like us and we want to hire friends. But I think what you were getting at when you made that talk was how important it is to find people with complementary skills and a diverse team. And that's really where the new ideas come from, is from bouncing off ideas from people who think differently.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stems back to the values that are important in the company. So, I mean, this, Alan, like in our list of values, you don't have things such as friends.
Right.
Like our values aren't friendship, right? But we do have values such as, open and honest communication and transparency. And, my big thing is I care a lot more about getting to the truth than being right. Right. I'm also a big believer in that phrase, strong opinions loosely held. And, to your point, diversity of perspective and thought is important because no one's going to be right all the time. And so you need other people with different perspectives who care more about the truth and being willing to challenge ideas and not take it personally, right? It's about getting to the truth rather than, being, than worrying about being sensitive to me. Right. I'm totally fine if you tell me my idea is wrong and you can help me understand another perspective. Like I want to hear those things. And I think, that's a very healthy value so that the team actually gets smarter and better. I think it's problematic if people are so worried about being friends that they can't be honest with each other. And the way I look at it too is that, how would you want your family to treat you? Your company is like a family. When you love someone, you tell them the truth. When you really love someone, you fight with them because you're honest with them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not about fighting. It's about the fact that you care so much about the family or the relationship that you're completely honest, even if it's hurtful sometimes. Not, you don't want to hurt the person, but sometimes the truth can be hurtful.
Sure. Yeah. And obviously in a relationship, sometimes letting go and letting things go is a good solution as well. But
fair enough, yeah.
that's a different topic altogether.
That's the next episode, right?
Yeah, exactly. Relationship advice with Josh and Alan. That would be great.
Yeah.
Another point, and this was a question that we would ask almost every single week, especially in the early days. The question was, what's keeping you up at night? And I think when you're saying, being mission driven and really passionate about the idea, it comes back to this type of a question. What are the things that are keeping you up at night, and how do you solve those things? And I'm assuming for yourself, it was almost always these readmissions and patient care and the fragmented care that patients are given today. Has your question evolved from then, or do you have kind of the same answers from what is keeping you up at night?
Yeah, it was funny. So, even before we started Seamless, when I was learning about readmissions, and I had this, that great mentor, Howie Abrams at UHN, at one point I became obsessed with even just defining what an avoidable or preventable readmission was, because I was finding that in the literature among different hospitals here, everyone was defining it differently. And so even just calculating readmission rates, at least where I wasn't standardized. And so I remember there was even one point where I woke up at, I think, like 2 a.m. and I typed up this whole framework of how to properly define avoidable readmissions. And then I sent it to my mentor, and then he never responded to it. And then I woke up the next day and I thought to myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what the heck did I write? Like, why did I even send this? Right. I'm not even sure if it made that much sense. So to his point, he probably looked at it and said, well, this is interesting. Not going to respond to this one. Right. But that shows you, how obsessed I was with the concept.
Now, it was literally keeping you up at night.
It was literally keeping up. It was like, how do you define this properly? And then what I realize now is that it's not the definitions that matter that much. It's about the execution. It's about how do you actually practically solve the problem. And so what keeps you up at night has changed, right? So, back then it was a definition. Then it became, we started the company. It was about, okay, well, how do we actually, how do Willie, Phil, and I actually work together, right? Because we never worked together before when we started this, right? And then at some point you figure out how to work together, and then the next problem changes. And so then it became, okay, well, how do we actually get our first, hospital or health system using this, right? Because we have no proof points before, we have no validation, right? No credibility. And then eventually it became, okay, great. It's great that you can get one or two. Now, how do you get, 5 or 10? And so I think the neat thing about building an organization is that you get the opportunity to keep solving new challenges. Now, if you have a different perspective, you might say, oh my God, the challenge keeps changing. And I feel like every time I've mastered or tried to master something, now I'm back to square one. And so I think depending on whether, you're the type of person who's excited for new challenges, or you prefer being a master of your craft, you may or may not like, building a company, let alone one in healthcare.
Yeah, and I definitely see there's a mix in our team, and you need a mix of different perspectives for the team to work really well overall. But there's definitely some people at the company who are probably like-minded to yourself, where they thrive on challenges and new challenges and trying to figure out, okay, well, we've solved one thing, but here's the next set of 3 challenges. How do we solve these? What about the importance of communicating your ideas? And I know early on in the company, before you even had the first implementation, the main challenge was get the idea out there and see how the market responds to that. Is that still your advice today? If somebody was starting a company, one of the first things you should do is get out there and talk to people.
Yeah. So this is, and I think this is weird misconception that ideas are so valuable they should be secret, and that if you tell people, they might steal your idea. But if you believe, like you and I do, Alan, that 99% of the success of idea is the actual execution, you realize that it's actually more valuable for you to share the idea, because when you can share your idea, you get feedback. Right? People tell you what they like, but more importantly, they tell you why it won't work. And as you get that feedback, you kind of start reiterating your idea. You start figuring out, okay, how am I going to morph the idea or my plan to overcome those objections, because they're probably fair. And at some point, you will have iterated the idea enough, and you'll be able to answer all those objections that you can say, oh, I have a viable way to bring this idea to life. But that only happens if you put it out there in the world and get feedback. And here's the truth, right? Most people, and by most I mean 99.9% of people, will not care to execute on your idea. And of those who actually care to, they'd have to actually end up executing it better than you. The chances of that happening are so rare, because most people are just not going to care about your idea. They have their own ideas that they think are interesting and valuable. And so you are better off sharing it. And the other benefit of sharing is that, number one, it could lead to team members that say, oh, Alan, that's an awesome idea. I'm excited about that. I want to join you on your mission. And not just team members, but customers, partners, right? So getting the word out is important, both in the early days and out there. It's kind of like, some people, there's a lot of companies where if you go to their website, I still can't understand what they do. They don't put screenshots of their product. They're afraid of giving away the IP in these screenshots, which honestly, I mean, really, if your IP is the screenshots, I don't think you have any real IP, to be honest. Whereas if you share what you do, if you give screenshots, videos, you make it easier for your customers, your future employees, your future investors to understand what you do and educate themselves on the opportunity to work with you. And I think that's much more valuable than trying to keep it a secret.
Totally. And then let's say you have this idea, you've told people about it, you've gotten some feedback from people, and you want to start, implementing, or you want to start piloting and getting feedback from the actual use case of a customer. In the healthcare industry and selling to health systems and hospitals, that's a pretty lengthy journey to get off the ground running with a pilot. What's your advice to anybody starting a healthcare company in terms of getting the product out in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to look for the lowest hanging fruit, because the number one thing that kills a startup or a company is time, right? So, I think when we first started the company, it took us about 12 months just to get our first hospital partner to get them to having an agreement signed just to do a free study.
Wow.
I mean, in most organizations, your urgent frankly will have probably been dead by then. It took you a year just to get someone to say to formally say yes, we'll use this. And so if I could go back in time, the lowest hanging fruit would have been just work with private clinical practices,
Right.
work with individual surgeon practices. If you work with a surgeon's practice, there's just one decision maker to get a yes from. It's the surgeon, right? For example, it's not 10 other people in this, complex web of stakeholders like in a large organization. And then we would have gone in data faster. The product would have iterated faster.
Right.
And then frankly, it would have been more attractive to and de-risked for larger healthcare organizations when they can see, oh, wow, you've had, this many thousand patients on it with this feedback and the product's more evolved. And then sure, at some point you might want to go to health systems, but having that, low hanging fruit success gets you there faster ultimately. So I think that's one thing we've done differently. And I always encourage people in the space to find out like what's your lowest hanging fruit. And it could be the fact that it's a clinic and not a hospital. It could be the fact that it's a certain type of provider that's easier
Right.
to access. It could be a certain specialty that's easier to work with at the start. Whatever that is for you, try to figure out what that lowest hanging fruit is and go from there.
And your point about collecting data faster and iterating the product, I think that's the most important thing from, why you need those early customers is to get their actual feedback on the product so you can build it from there. You mentioned in one of our earlier podcasts, when the product first started, it was post-op monitoring, a simple survey that was put onto the product and would maybe give feedback to the patient based on the threshold. And then from there, how it's grown over time, it's like, if you map it out on paper, it's incredible to see how it's changed over time, but it's only once you get those data points that you can easily make those decisions to change the product and continue the innovation. I think another part, that's particular to healthcare is how innovation even happens in healthcare. And I think a lot of it is around incentive. And, when we first started versus how it is today, obviously the incentive models have changed. Do you have any information on that sphere or how incentives maybe drive innovation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. One for sure has been that shift to value-based care. So the fact that more and more organizations are paid not just based on how much volume they do in terms of patients, patient surgeries or tests or visits, but more so based on value. So complications, readmission rates, patient satisfaction, right? More and more funding is tied to metrics like that. And so for the first time, organizations and providers care about engaging patients beyond the four walls, monitoring them to catch problems earlier. So that's one thing. Definitely a second thing has been not just the incentives, but just the consumer expectations, right? We talked a bit about this earlier, I think. There's patients who now view themselves as healthcare consumers. And so as consumers, you're expecting a better digital experience. So that's another thing. And then, certainly with COVID-19, there's that shift as well in order to, bring patients back into a health system, you have to show that you can care for them safely in the new COVID world. Patients and providers don't want patients coming back in person for visits that could be done, whether through video or frankly, whether through asynchronous monitoring, right? I mean, we've had patients, on Seamless, Alan, where if they record in our platform that, that they're back to baseline, their pain is to zero, they're not having issues, providers, forget even a video visit, maybe a provider doesn't even have to communicate with them at all. Just look at the data and say, okay, they're back to baseline. I have it documented now. Let's not waste that patient's time or mine speaking about what I already know, So COVID-19 is accelerating that shift as well. And then certainly we're also seeing over the years more and more reimbursement tied to using technology. So, there are CPT reimbursement codes for, monitoring patient biometric data, such as, blood pressure or heart rate, for example, using sensors and devices. And I think it's not going to be uncommon in the next 5 years that there's going to be more and more reimbursement tied to more digital solutions or workflows. Because the evidence is going to be overwhelming that digital is a much more scalable way to drive outcomes and cost savings. And the best way to incentivize providers to use these new tools is to reimburse for them,
Right.
in some way or another.
Totally. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. Why would we change practice unless we're being incentivized? It's just kind of natural to humans, really.
Yeah, this is a weird thing, Alan, where people in healthcare are very well intentioned, and people in healthcare really care about patients, but people in healthcare are also people.
Right.
And so we also succumb to forces of society that force us to be rational given our situation, which includes incentives, right? And so, as well intentioned as a physician might be, they're still going to act a lot based on how they're paid,
Right.
and you can't blame them. That's true of so many humans.
Totally. Yeah. They have families to feed. They have businesses to run themselves.
Yeah, and it's about, okay, how do you pay people to do the right thing for patients?
Right.
That's more important.
How
And
you
if you
tie
fix
the
that,
incentives around. Yeah. What would if you had to summarize kind of your top points for somebody who wants to start a new healthcare technology company? What kind of advice would you give them that could maybe fit on a napkin or something, like just a few points?
Well, Alan, actually, no, I don't have a napkin.
You have your napkin from when you started.
My napkin is really big, Alex. I got
Yeah.
here. So
Well,
the first
yeah,
one,
you go, well, Alan, actually, I don't know if you know this about napkins, but you can actually unfold them to 4 bigger squares, and it's this huge thing.
I write at size 5 font, so I got
Right,
a lot of stuff to cover here. But number one would be, don't start one. You know why? Because if I tell someone not to start a healthcare technology company, and that demotivates you enough that you don't start one, then you probably weren't the right fit to do in the first place. If it's so easy for someone to tell you no, you don't do it, probably weren't the right fit. So the first thing I would say is don't do it, and see if they still do it. See if they're still crazy enough to do it. The second thing would be to not try to start a company, but instead just try to solve a problem that's important to you. So I think a lot of companies start out as great side projects or interests or hobbies, right? So like for us, it was about wanting to solve this readmission problem that I was obsessed with in my training, for example, or a more everyday example would be Twitter. Twitter didn't start off as a company. Twitter was this side project that was started by a podcasting company called Audio that couldn't make the podcasting company work, and they just started Twitter, and they just turned that into a company. And so I think a lot of great companies come from side projects. I think especially in healthcare, that's true too. So I would say don't go. I don't think it's feasible to go looking for a problem to solve in healthcare and then try to build a company. Just solve problems that you care about, and then when it becomes time to build a company around it, then build a company around it. And then the third thing would be just to follow your curiosity, right? Again, it goes back to, if you work on a problem that you're genuinely curious about, that you're obsessed with, that you lose sleep over, that's going to carry you a long way. So stick to the things that you're curious about, and then let it grow from there.
That's great. That's fantastic advice. I'm going to go start a company now, Josh.
No.
I should reframe. I'm going to go solve a problem that I'm curious about now.
Yeah.
And then I'll wrap my company around that. That's great. Do you have any other kind of closing thoughts for this topic? I don't want to take up too much of your time, but.
Well, I mean, you kind of did, so it's a little late for that comment, but.
I mean, we did have this scheduled for the hour, so.
That's fair, Alan. That's fair. Touche. No, I think you covered a lot of really good stuff. I mean, I think one thing that I love to get is questions and comments from the millions of viewers that we have. So I would say if they could drop a comment. I mean, you got to ask for them to drop the like as well, Alan.
That's a great point.
You got to subscribe. You got to like it, and then ask a question.
Yeah, this is a message for our audience, for the at least thousands of people that are already listening. If you do want us to continue these topics and these discussions and get into even deeper topics in this healthcare space and invite guests onto the show, please like and subscribe to the podcast, the YouTube video, wherever you're watching it or listening to this podcast. Go ahead and share it with your friends. Show everybody that you know. If your grandmother is over 90 years old, I know she wants to listen to us talk as well. So get it in her hands as well. And just spread the word about Dr. Joshua Liu and Alan Sardana with the SeamlessMD podcast.
Absolutely. And that's advice number 4, Alan, which is always make the ask. And you did.
There you go. Well, awesome, Josh. I think this has been a great episode. I'm happy to share this with the world, and hopefully people learn a little bit of something for building a healthcare technology company.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate you having me as always.
Thanks, Josh. Bye.
Yeah.